Namaste and good afternoon. I, Mahima Kapoor, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend a warm welcome to you all to the IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. Today, we have gathered for a lecture on the right to development and sustainable development, reflections on global and South Asian developments by Dr. Shyami Puvimanasinghe. This discussion is being organized by the Center for Human Dignity and Development at IMPRI and Center for Development, Communication and Studies, CDECS, Jaipur. I feel privileged to introduce the moderator for the session, Professor Sunil Ray. Sir has served as the director of A.N. Sinha Institute of Social Studies, Patna. Prior to that, he was professor of economics at the Institute of Development Studies, Jaipur, and has taught at National Institute of Rural Development, Hyderabad, Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bangalore, and was a visiting fellow at the Institute of Development Studies, Sussex, and Institute of Oriental Studies, Russia. He was awarded Senior Fellowship by Government of Germany at Max Weber Stiftung to work on alternative development paradigm. Professor Ray has 35 years of experience in research and teaching in the field of environmental economics, political economy of development, rural development, and institutional economics. He was part of the review mission team of the European Commission and has worked on several consulting assignments with the World Bank and other international organizations. His papers have been published extensively in reputed national and international journals. He has authored several books, including Industrial Growth and Protection in India, Natural Resources, Organization and Technology Linkages, Agricultural Services and the Poor, Management of Natural Resources, Institutions for Sustainable Livelihood, and Theorizing Cohesive Development and Alternative Paradigm. Presently, he is an advisor at CDECS and IMPRI. Welcome, sir. I am honored to introduce our eminent speaker for today, Dr. Shyami Puvimanasinghe. Ma'am is the Human Rights Officer at Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Geneva, Switzerland, where she supports the mandates on the right to development and on international cooperation. She previously served as the senior lecturer at the Faculty of Law, University of Colombo, Sri Lanka, where she taught several subjects, including environmental law and sustainable development. She has also worked with non-governmental organizations in Gaborone, Botswana, on ethics, law, HIV/AIDS, human rights, environment, and development. She is an attorney at law of the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka and holds a Bachelor of Law degree from University of Colombo, a Master of Law from Harvard Law School, USA, a postgraduate diploma in International Law and Organization for Development, and a Doctor of Philosophy in Development Studies from the International Institute of Social Studies, the Netherlands. Her publications include the book, Foreign Investment, Human Rights and the Environment, a Perspective from South Asia on the Role of Public International Law for Development, and several book chapters and journal articles, mostly in the area of sustainable development. They include publications on the right to development, international solidarity and cooperation, foreign investment, human rights, public interest litigation, and economic, social, and environmental justice, especially with reference to South Asia. We welcome you, ma'am. We are fortunate to have with us Dr. Jos Chathukulam, Dr. Gopal Krishna, and Professor H.S. Shailendra as the discussants for the session. Dr. Jos Chathukulam is the director at Center for Rural Management, Kottayam. Welcome, sir. Dr. Gopal Krishna is a fellow, International Research Group on Authoritarianism and Counter Strategies, Rosa, Luxemburg, Stiftung, Berlin, and guest fellow at Faculty of Law, Humboldt University, Berlin. We welcome you, sir. Professor H.S. Shailendra is a professor, Social Science area at Institute of Rural Management, Anand, Gujarat. Welcome, sir. Now, I invite Professor Ray to take the proceedings further, and we look forward to learning from our esteemed gathering. Thank you.
Professor Ray, kindly unmute yourself. Professor Ray, you have to unmute yourself, sir. Bottom left. So bottom left, the mic sign. Yes.
Are you able to hear me? Are you able to hear me, Dr.
Yes,
Arjun?
we can hear you. Yes, we can.
Good. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mahima, for your nice introduction to every one of us. I also thank Dr. Arjun for giving me an opportunity to moderate such a nice discussion that is going to be ensued based on the presentation to be made by Dr. Swami. We are really fortunate that we are having this evening. Dr. Swami is an eminent writer, at the same time a superb intellectual and a thinker, especially from the developing countries like India. Actually, when I read her outline and also closely seen the title of our presentation, you could see very interestingly, very methodologically, she has explained that right to development and then comes sustainable development. That's something which is very much insightful in certain sense. Right to development and then comes sustainable development. What it means that if you really want development to sustain, ensure the right of the people to development. That is implied, that is what I understand. And if I understand her outlines, is something which is very important, relevant to the kind of a forum which Dr. Arjun has created at IMPRI. In fact, when I came out with my work on cohesive development as an alternative development paradigm, and also made a presentation in this forum, Dr. Arjun was quite intellectually stimulated and his team members as well. And they all felt that they need to have, under the leadership of Dr. Arjun, a kind of a forum where academicians, intellectuals, social scientists in general can come, explain, express a different point of view, different cosmovision, different worldview altogether, and different from and opposed to modern, what is called a dominant development paradigm. This is precisely what the objective of this forum is all about. It's not like any other thing that you go on describing, narrating, and then end up with the narration with a bit of implications here and there and making a policy approach. No. This forum says that, well, that is done. Now come out with something which is much more important. A new theoretical construction. Is it possible for us to conceive? How is it possible for us to escape, rather get rid of this, what is called dominant development paradigm, kind of a logic which have been invading the psyche of every one of us throughout the world, especially third world countries like India and Sri Lanka and so on and so forth. How to get out of it? Can we think something very alternative or different kind of a thing? This is the forum. This forum is exclusively meant to address such questions. It is precisely here I could see how that Dr. Swami's presentation, when I go in through her outlines, I could see that very importantly, she wants to see and open up. I mean, this is the 6th or 7th in the series, and all eminent scholars from all over the world have spoken here in this forum. This is the first time I could see, and each one I have moderated, but this is the first time I could see Dr. Swami's presentation is something different from, as I could presume that it's from looking at the things from the legal point of view, international law, and then talking about sustainable development, talking about the right to development and so on and so forth. And then she also very critical of what is called modern or dominant development paradigm, which originated in the West some 2 centuries ago. and have been invading throughout the world, have been running throughout the world now, even now also through an more inspired through globalization. And then she says that if you really want to come out from this kind of thing, have a different alternative discourse of development, you certainly have to bank upon international solidarity. The solidarity, both at the international level, at the regional level. It means that what I have been working on cohesive development. Let me put it very simple way and one or two sentences. This is the thesis what I have developed, this cohesive development, which is basically dependent on solidarism. But solidarism is not in a vague terms, very categorical. Solidarism with one, it is the people who are deprived from all walks of life, social, political, religiously, racially, environmentally, and from all walks of life, the deprived people together need to have a cohesive solidarity amongst them and bring about what is called cohesive development. That is one thing, a forum, that is one thing, that idea or understanding that got crystallized over a period of time through the discussions and various presentations that I made. And I finally found that this is something which resonates at every corner of the world. May it be Latin American countries, may it be third world countries like Asian, South Asian countries like India. You find there is a huge what is called similarity of understanding or the objective material condition that have been really, giving it it's a serious problem, creating a serious problem to the people for their survival. Now, not only ecological, not only poverty, inequality, that is what Dr. Shyami is talking about, going to talk about, but also ecological. Now, the challenge is how do you bring them together to have an integrated approach towards change, towards transformation, towards development, especially the third world countries. I find, to begin with, is very exciting and very stimulating lecture that you are going to hear from Dr. Shyami, especially from the legal point of view, how it is to be justified by the international law. It's best talk, is it rhetoric or reality? It turns out to be much more rhetoric in many sense. But when it comes to reality, you find there's a huge gap between the reality and the rhetoric. That is something is a very serious problem. It's nice to hear about what the law is speaking about. But when it comes to practice, you find that there is a huge gap. How to really bridge this gap? Is it not the social movement that people have been waging against this kind of tyrannical system, which need to be welcomed at every point of time, both at the national level, at the international level? Well, this could be an issue for us to talk about and all that. But anyway, I leave it at that. But I must say that we have got very eminent panelists, very eminent, and each one has very serious academic credentials, not only at the field level, but also theoretical construction level. They have established their credibility. We are really very fortunate that we have very eminent panel of what is called eminent panelists, social scientists, and will be able to deliberate on each and every issue and therefore develop an argument based on that. Ultimately, you see, where do you want to reach and how do you want to reach? That's something, the contribution of each one will be extraordinarily beneficial for this discussion. On the one hand, we have Dr. Gopal Krishna, who is an eminent, who is a tremendous exposure on what is called law, as I know all of them, law, and also at the same time, the social science. Law and social science he combines together, which is a unique combination that he has been doing for several years. Similarly, Professor Shailendra, he has been working both at the field as well as the theoretical level, which is extraordinarily beneficial, and most importantly, on theory of cooperation. And that has an implicit understanding on solidarism, which is something which is very important for us to take note of. At the same time, we have the Thomas, Jos Chathukulam. Dr. Jos has a very, very serious gaps over what is called the micro level situation at the Panchayat decentralized level, and how the development could be really further fostered, can be enhanced based on what is called cooperative, based on solidarity among the people together at the micro level, especially those who are being deprived all along. So we are very fortunate that we have got eminent scholars with us, along with the speakers, Dr. Shyami, who is all on. And I take this opportunity to begin with Dr. Arjun, later on may think about developing a forum at the South Asian level. Maybe that Dr. Swami may take this initiative, or at the initiative of Dr. Swami, that we can think about opening a forum at the what is called international level, especially with these South Asian states, countries. Thank you so much. And with this, brief, what is called opening remarks, may I request Dr. Swami to speak, to enlighten us on the issues that she's going to talk about. Thank you so much. Dr. Swami.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Sunil Rai. Thank you very much for inviting me to join you today. Namaste, Ayubovan, Vanakkam. Let me start, as I said in my abstract, with a few reflections on what is the right to development. Now, the right to development, according to international law, makes development a human right. So it's not a generosity, it's not a luxury, it is a human right. And maybe I'll say a couple of words about human rights before going on to right to development, because I realize that, as I said in the abstract, development has traditionally been in the hands mostly of economists, and lawyers have been traditionally been not so engaged in the field of development and development studies. But there is a long history, as excellently pointed out by Dr. Sunil Rai, that there is this development law, human rights law, environmental law, which is very much a part of our theory, but we still have to make a huge linkage with development in practice. So there is a lot of good human rights law, which could be very informative for development in theory as well as practice, but the connections have not been made as much as they could be to improve human life for the human being. Human rights basically look at the rights of all people everywhere in the world. Why? Simply by the fact that they are born human. Everybody is born with certain human rights, simply by the fact of being born a human being. And human rights looks more particularly at those who are poor, at those who are vulnerable, at those who are marginalized. So the more marginalized, poor, or vulnerable you are, the more human rights would come to your protection. Traditionally, human rights discourse again has been much more about civil and political rights. The average person has heard about, say, the right to freedom of expression or freedom of assembly, but water is also a human right. Food is also a human right. And for developing countries, like Dr. Ray just pointed out, the economic, social, cultural rights are even more important, or just as important, as the civil and political rights. And the aim of development should be to deliver all these human rights to all people. So with that, I'll go to the right development specifically, because that is the human right that I work on at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. I'm here speaking in my personal capacity as an author, as a long-time researcher and writer on these issues, particularly on sustainable development. However, I do work for the office, and therefore I will also relate this presentation to my work at the office, so that I cover both angles. So what is the right to development? Who are the rights holders and duty bearers of the right to development? The right to development exists in both international and regional laws. And finally, what is the connection between the right to development, human rights, and the 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development Goals? So the right to development came about in 1986 in the Declaration on the Right to Development, which said it's an inalienable. Nobody can take it away from you, at least in theory. The problem is that it is taken away in practice. An inalienable human right by virtue of which every human person and all peoples, you see the individual aspect and the collective aspect, and particularly for example, South Asian societies or developing country societies, this collective angle becomes very important. If you look at the African concept of Ubuntu, it says, I am because we are. I cannot enjoy life or development or my rights alone. I am part of a larger community, a collective. So an inalienable human right by virtue of which every human person and all individuals are entitled to participate in, contribute to, and enjoy economic, social, cultural, and political development in which all human rights and fundamental freedoms can be fully realized. So it is a bit idealistic. I don't say no. However, I think it's only if we have ideals, if we have dreams, if we have aims and goals and targets, that we can even begin to try and reach them. So there's the human person and all peoples. And there are three entitlements here to participate in. Everyone has the right to participate in development, to contribute to development, and to enjoy development. And again, you see that it's not talking just of economic development, to enjoy economic, social, cultural, and political development, in which all human rights and fundamental freedoms can be realized for all people, fully realized for all people. So that's the essence of the right to development. A little bit of the history, I think maybe you know the history of the right to development. It came out of decolonization, because when countries like India, Sri Lanka attained independence in 1947, 1948, we got legally independence and political independence, but countries began to realize quite soon that we didn't have full economic independence in the global setup. So there are still up-to-date organizations which do not give a right to a voting right to developing countries, which are very much run by the world's most rich and powerful countries, which decide on many economic issues, which decide also for the rest. So a few decide for the rest. So the right to development came out of that struggle. It came out of a struggle for economic justice and global justice at that international level, but it also includes the national level. So it's also the duties of countries towards their own people. People-centered development. So the right to development principles and elements include that the human person is the central subject, participant, and beneficiary of development. Who should benefit from development? The people. Who should participate? The people. Who should be the center? The people. Human rights-based approach is part and parcel. You may have heard about the human rights-based approach more than you heard about the right to development, because it is often used at the country policy planning level, in some countries at least, to have development should be carried out in a manner in which all human rights and fundamental freedoms can be fully realized. That's the idea of the human rights-based approach at the national level. But it's not enough. It's very important at the national level, but at the international level, like Dr. Rai said, we need international cooperation and solidarity is very important. And now more than ever, with the COVID-19 crisis, which has also brought health crisis, social and economic crisis, financial crisis. Climate change was already there, and it's probably closely linked to the COVID-19 pandemic. So with all these crises, we need international cooperation and solidarity, as well as regional cooperation and solidarity. And I like the idea that Dr. Ray said that maybe we should do more regional cooperation and, work together more among the 8 South Asian countries. Active, free, and meaningful participation. All people have a right to actively, freely, and meaningfully participate in development. We talk of individuals and peoples because don't forget this right to development came out of a fight of nations, the fight of newly independent, formerly colonized nations for justice at the international level. In trade, in investment, in all these international global economic affairs. So non-discrimination is very important, especially in countries like ours. I think we have to stress this. Non-discrimination and equality are part of all human rights. And so it means no distinction as to race, sex, language, religion. I would add caste, the South Asian context, class, all of these things should not be discriminatory. Equity means fair distribution of the benefits of development. Traditionally, we have been going along with this idea of the trickle-down effect. So development happens and it is assumed that it will reach the people at the bottom, but we have seen, particularly in an era of globalization, that that does not happen. And that the people at the bottom, that the gap between the rich and the poor has got much greater in the last so many years, in the era of globalization, where you have global value chains and supply chains and all this, that the benefits of development do not often reach those who need it most. The right of self-determination and including sovereignty over natural wealth and resources is also very part, because this human right is a balance between the human rights of individuals and the human rights of peoples, as well as the opportunities of nations. And because of that, we talk also here in the right to development about self-determination and sovereignty over natural wealth and resources. We see, for example, in many developing countries, especially African countries, that African countries are probably the richest in terms of natural resources. They've got the gold and the copper and the silver and all these. But the way that the international system works, somehow the riches don't seem to reach the people in those countries. They are for the most part taken away from them. There are more principles of the right to development, such as that development should be comprehensive. We should eliminate all human rights violations. Peace, security, and disarmament are also part of the right to development. Article 7, I can refer you to the Declaration on the Right to Development, 1986. Article 7 talks about the importance of peace and security and disarmament. And equality of opportunity for development is a prerogative of both nations and individuals who make up nations. International cooperation goes to the very center or core of the right to development. So the states have the duty to cooperate to create an enabling environment for development at all levels, national, local, and to eliminate obstacles to development. Some of these trading rules, for example, I think a good example is the vaccine issue, the whole global vaccine issue, which is depriving many people in poor countries of getting the COVID-19 vaccine. You must be very familiar with the fight by India and South Africa to get a waiver from the TRIPS agreement in this emergency. It's an emergency, it's a global crisis. Can we get a waiver from the usual rules of intellectual property rights in order to deliver the human rights of people? And that's been a long fight, and that struggle is still going on. The right to development calls for policies. The most important thing is that policies at all levels should be enabling of human-centered development, human dignity, rights and freedoms. Now, who have the rights? Individuals, peoples, meaning the entire population, because there are some issues, for example, this vaccine issue or this trade issue, which in the COVID crisis, one thing that has become obvious is that there are inequalities both between and within countries. And this inequalities among countries has become very obvious and has been exposed and exacerbated in the COVID-19 crisis. Then, of course, vulnerable groups like children, persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, all of these peoples have have to have a special focus, a special attention when it comes to the right to development. But it's not only the governments, it's everyone has a duty. The right to development is set in a way that we all have duties to fulfill the right to development and to help others to fulfill their right to development. If I take you back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 1 says all human beings are born equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and need to act towards each other with a spirit of brotherhood or spirit of solidarity, one could say. So all human beings, our actions have certain consequences on the human rights, on environment, and need to be taken into account. The right to development has three particular levels of duties. One is the national level, of course, like all human rights, so national policies, programs internally. Internationally, through policies extending beyond their jurisdiction. So, for instance, country A can do something like give subsidies to its farmers that affects the farmers of country B. So, extraterritorial impacts. And the third one is collectively through global and regional. So the United Nations and all global and regional organizations are really organizations of member states acting collectively. And so when they act collectively also, they have duties under the right to development. Now, I will go then from the right to development, I'll make the transition to sustainable development. I think this is probably a much better, well-known concept to everyone, because we have now the 2030 agenda, the sustainable development goals, and we have the 17 goals together with 169 targets, as well as indicators. One thing that we should point out, even we are looking at the right to development and sustainable development together, is that to make implementing the sustainable development goals, human rights are key. That is already there in the agenda itself. It says that it is anchored in international law. It is anchored in human rights law, etc. So if it is, but this is often overlooked because this is not a familiar terrain. It is not a familiar area for governments, for policymakers and others who are making policies at the national or local or international level. Somehow human rights law and international law is a bit alien or a bit distant to their everyday work. It's been more the economic and policy planning work. And I think we have to make these connections. We have to bring these things all closer together in the era of sustainable development, where we can no longer talk of economic development only. Sustainable development brings together the three dimensions of economic, social, and environmental. And the right to development in connection to that, it links already, it has linked way back in 1986, and going back to a fight which started in the 1950s and 60s by African countries. It was really African countries who started the argument for the right to development, saying that the global system was unfair and needed to be more fair towards the poorer countries, the newly independent countries. And so in the African continent, under the Article 22 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the right to development is legally binding. Under the declaration, it is only a declaration, the United Nations Declaration. So one can argue whether it's legally binding or not. That takes us into more issues. But sustainable development, as you probably are familiar with, one of the most popular definitions of it, which was in 1987, the Gro Harlem Brundtland, or the World Commission on Environment and Development, which said, it is development that meets the needs of present generations without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That is still pretty much the definition, although we have the 2030 Agenda, Sustainable Development Goals, spelling out a more policy framework and operational framework. In 2015, we had all these developments, which are very important for development going forward. There is a 2030 Agenda and SDGs, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on financing for development. Without financing for development, many developing countries will not be able to go forward in development, especially now with the COVID crisis, which has, I mean, we know that the SDGs were already somewhat off track, but with the COVID and the related financial and economic crisis, they have gone further off track. And one of the main ways from the Secretary General of the United Nations and everyone, our High Commissioner for Human Rights, have been talking about this need, the need of the hour is international cooperation and solidarity. We have to find ways to live and let live. We have to find ways of, sharing resources. Now, India, for example, your country shared the vaccine. I can say in a very personal way, my mom got the vaccine in Sri Lanka because India shared the vaccine with the countries in the neighborhood until, of course, India, unfortunately, and I'm very sorry for that, went into a deep crisis. And I wish that you will, soon be coming out of that crisis. But this is the way, I mean, the only way to live and to survive as a humanity in this very difficult age of climate change and many other crises, the pandemic, is to help each other as well in a very simple way. And I would also like to read just a line which again shows the connections between India, Sri Lanka, and our South Asian heritage. This is the idea of sustainable development, but going back to 247 to 300 and 200 and many years before Christ. It was a story where the king Devanampiyatissa, an ancient king in Sri Lanka, was hunting. He was hunting in the forest when Arahat Mahinda, who was the son of the Emperor Asoka of India, who brought Buddhism to Sri Lanka, preached to him a sermon which converted him to Buddhism. The basic principles of which are simplicity in living, equilibrium, moderation, and the middle path. And I think sustainable development requires this moderation in living, not overstepping nature's limits. We have already been destroying the environment, and we really have, I think we need a change of lifestyle to both preserve what's left of the environment and ecosphere, as well as fellow human beings, as well as other species. So the word says, O great king, the birds of the air and the bees have an equal right to live as thou. The land belongs to the people and all living beings. Thou art only the guardian of it. So the idea being that government and governance is a duty, not a right in itself. It's a duty, and governments and governance, whether it's from the most local level to the most international, is the idea of stewardship, of looking after public resources for the benefit of all people. And that they have a trust, a sacred public trust, to look after the environment and human beings, and that the king had no special right. The king had an equal right to the birds and the bees. This is what was said. And this was actually brought up again in the International Court of Justice. We had the vice president at the time was Sri Lankan, Professor Veeramantri, you may have heard of him, or Judge Veeramantri, he died a few years ago. He showed in a case called Hungary versus Slovakia, he brought all these ancient notions of sustainable development in China, in India, in small countries like ours, in Egypt, in the ancient civilizations, where people were living very sustainably. And we have now gone very far from that. How do we even start to go back to that kind of sustainability? And in a way, COVID has opened our eyes to the unsustainability of present lifestyles, and globalization will have to be done in a different way. We will have to do more locally, perhaps. Local development, self-sufficiency could be something that we think about. So a little bit more on sustainable development, public interest litigation in South Asia before how am I on time? Am I already overstepped my time?
No, ma'am, please go ahead.
Sure. So
Yes.
a few minutes more only. Following the very unfortunate tragedy of Bhopal in 1983, I think 83 December it was, or 84. We saw that the legal system could not cope with such a big tragedy where many people die, the environment is destroyed, and then there were all these issues because you are not having, it's not just a local issue, but a transnational issue. You have the local subsidiary of Union Carbide India Limited in Madhya Pradesh, no, in Bhopal. So I think that was an eye-opener in the region and in India, that the law also had to find solutions for issues like this, and issues of development versus human rights versus the environment. And with that was started in 1991, you had the case of Suresh Kumar versus the Union of India, I think, where people started bringing cases in the public interest, not just my interest, because normally in the law, you have to be an affected person to bring a case. But the idea of public interest litigation started in the 1980s and 1990s in India, and it spread to the region. So we have already had this kind of cooperation and this kind of thing of sharing good practices. So it was from the Indian Supreme Court, from justices like Krishna Iyer and Bhavati at that time, that some of the greatest judgments came. I remember the case of Municipal Council versus Ratlam Municipality, where the Supreme Court judge said, if people are living in subhuman conditions, this is like sometimes the third world humanscape of population, poverty, pollution, all in one place, and people are living in subhuman conditions, what he said is, build toilets. And how do you do this? Because by enforcing certain duties of government. We have in administrative law, we have mandates coming from ancient Latin term, certiorari, meaning you cancel the action of a government, or mandamus, you make a government or local government do its duties. So it's the judge said, build drains, build toilets. These are the work of the municipal council, right? But sometimes the law can be useful when there is governmental neglect or governmental mismanagement, which is again a very typical of many countries, especially poorer countries, corruption, etc. Sometimes legal tools can be useful, and not just by one person coming and saying my rights were violated, but by a whole community. So public interest litigation has come through representative standing. So you have had lawyers, MC Mehta comes to mind most when it comes to environmental law in India, where he would bring a case in the public interest, not in his own interest, but say of all the people living in a particular area who were getting affected by pollution or some industry or whatever. So that then in Pakistan, we have similar cases, a grid station which was giving out some kind of some harmful thing to the people in the neighborhood. In Nepal, we had a similar lawyer Prakash Mani Sharma, who brought these cases against the Godavari, against the mines, which were polluting and destroying the beauty of nature in the Godavari Hills area. So that's Nepal. We have cases from Pakistan and in India, many cases. Then we have cases from Bangladesh, for example, on the breaking down of ships, the ship breaking industry, which is very hazardous for the people living around that area, and usually poor people who are affected by these things. In Sri Lanka also, we have several cases of this nature, and these were all actually a South Asian sustainable development jurisprudence, which was developed in the 80s, 90s, and into the 2000s. It is less known of now, I think, because we know that today things are also a bit different. There's sort of a democratic decay. There is a, not so many human rights in many countries are more on the decline. So it's not such a good time, but I think that these could still be used, public interest litigations for these kind of cases. In Sri Lanka, for example, we have the Pavala case, where there was enough phosphate in the north central province to mine sustainably for the next 1,000 years. But this company came, a subsidiary of a global company, entered a joint venture agreement with the government. And it was quick fix, trying to mine all the phosphate now in 30 years. So there won't be any in future for future generations. And so in sustainability, we have to think of the future. We have to think of the rights, not only use everything now and finish it, but how do we sustain, conserve things for future generations? How do we think over time? And it doesn't always go with politics, because political leaders are thinking more of the next election or of this present reign. But so that's why others, law and in the public interest litigation sphere, apart from representative standing, there's class action, like many people who are affected by one problem, then get together and mobilize and bring a class action. So there's different kinds of public interest litigation, which I think is a very useful tool from the legal side of things to assert human rights. So in the Pavala case that I was telling you about, the Supreme Court managed to cancel the agreement. They said, no, this cannot go ahead. You need to first observe the processes under the National Environmental Act. You need to do an environmental impact assessment. At least observe the processes. So we've had many cases like that in Sri Lanka also, which have where the public interest citizens or people affected by something, like villagers in this case, many people were going to be displaced, 2,600 families, and even the local village, in our local setup, the villagers, the Buddhist monk in the temple, these are people who have an interest in the community aspect and the community well-being usually. So they all, the dairy farmers, they all got together and brought this case, and it was a success, and the project was brought to an end, at least at that point. So looking at all these things together, then how can I make some connections? I think the right to development is key to sustainable development, because it already has the human rights and development together. What it does not have so much is the environment. Why? Because the environmental discourse came about later, 1992 Rio Declaration on Right to on Environment and Development. And all the later developments. But I believe in the progressive development of international law, in the dynamism of things, in the fact that once that law is there, you have to interpret it in a dynamic way which works for the people. And therefore, I think that the right to development, as recognized actually in the 1992 Declaration on Environment and Development, Article 3 says, the right to development must be fulfilled to realize the equitably. The word equity is very important. Not just realize, but realize equitably the environmental and developmental needs of present and future generations. So it shows the connection between the right to development and sustainable development. And going forward now, we are in an era of the SDGs. SDGs must be implemented, but in a way that works for the people and for the environment. How do we do that? I think the answers are already there in the 2030 agenda. The agenda is anchored in international law and human rights law. And we are in a multidisciplinary setting. We need the economics, we need the laws, we need all the disciplines also to work together towards in a synergy. I know it is more easier to say than to do, because governments are not used to that. The finance ministry does its work, the environmental ministry does its work, and the same thing at the international level. The United Nations Environmental Program has its program, the Human Rights Program has its program. But I think going forward, there is also at the international level, you see some efforts at synergy, at looking at things in a more multidimensional and holistic manner. And let me stop there. Thank you.
Professor A, over to you. Sunil sir, can you hear us? You have to unmute yourself. Sunil sir, you have to unmute yourself. Bottom left. Yes.
Are you able to? Yeah. So, thank you, Dr. Swami. It's a very stimulating presentation. You have touched upon several issues, which perhaps to my mind, more of questions. It doesn't really provide answer the way it needs to be addressed and so on. I mean, it provokes somebody to think in a different way altogether. Now, I do not want to speak much on what you have spoken. Maybe at the end, in the concluding remarks, I may be able to speak a little bit on some of the issues that you have flagged up. But I now invite the eminent panelists to reflect on what Dr. Swami has spoken. Now, there are two levels at which you need to fix our mind. One is two contextual level. One is that the present international scenario and of course is global order. Unfortunately, I was looking forward to hear something related to global order, but Swami did not speak on the global order. Leaving aside the global order is something which is untouched, talking about sustainable development, talking about right to development, and somehow I was feeling slightly confused about all that. But anyway, this is the issue, something which needs to be really talked about. People have spoken quite a bit on that. It's not that something which is untouched, but when you really talk about this at the international level, we need to really take into consideration the global system, global order. That is something which cannot be undone. Having said that, may I request Dr. Jos Chathukulam to reflect on what Dr. Swami has spoken about and contextualizing the whole thing, both at the micro level as well as at the international or the macro level, something that could be very important for us to learn a few lessons from this kind of presentations. Professor Jos Chathukulam, please.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
audio is not working.
Yeah, dear respected moderator from Professor Sunil Ray and main speaker Shyami, Dr. Gopal Krishna and Professor Shailendra and their friends.
Sir, you will have to disconnect the other device or make its volume.
Just a minute.
Yes. Because it's echoing for all of us. It's two devices.
Yeah, okay, fine, sorry. Yeah. See, Dr. Chami has made excellent reflections on the right to development and sustainable development in South Asia in the context of sustainable development goals. She did within the paradigm of multidisciplinary approach of critical development theory. Of course, she has a very powerful legal lens in the sense that she touched the jurisprudence at the national level, at the international level, the legal regime. An excellent manner she could do with that. My first comment is that our speaker may be more comfortable in academic domain if she follows a Gandhi Kumarappa perspective to locate the issue of right to development and sustainable development. Very rightly, Dr. Shyami mentioned that there, right to development is the key to sustainable development. That is an underline, the major thesis she put forward. Yeah. She quotes a very powerful statement from Gandhi. From this I got from her abstract. The world has enough for everybody's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. Underline. The speaker is very clear that equitable distribution of natural resources and moderation in consumption is the answer. Underline. I feel the Gandhian economist Jos Chathukulam, in his classical work on economy of permanence, talks widely on such matters. The speaker says South Asia is one of the world's economically poorest regions. On the other side, she says it is rich in non-economic terms, ecological,
Hello? Hello?
Jos sir, can you hear us?
There's a problem here. Hello?
Sunil sir, some connection related issue.
a link between a development and right to development and sustainable development. The framework of Gandhi Kumarappa is a harmonious blend of the so-called economic and non-economic factors. I could see the speaker is seriously searching for an alternative paradigm to accommodate the problems of, number one, the climate change, development versus environment and human rights. Number three, poverty. 4, pollution. 5, loss of biodiversity. Discriminate liberalization and urbanization. Again, I feel in Gandhi Kumarappa perspective, the issues can be properly placed in the political context of local arena and at the international arena. The speaker gives the contemporary realities of COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the unfinished business of building social solidarity economy. Professor Sunil Ray has made an excellent presentation, an excellent paper on that, the social solidarity economy, decentralization, cooperativism, and self-management. Again, COVID-19 exposes several of the problems and offers an opportunity to revisit the unfinished reform projects in several countries, particularly in South Asian countries. An important lesson drawn from the COVID-19 pandemic has been how differentially states and regions reacted to it and took steps to protect its people from its effects. Scholars have already highlighted 3 facts exposed by the very pandemic. Number 1, the type of state and regime rather than wealth or per capita income has been the critical factor behind the success or failure of countries ineffectively responding to the pandemic. I would like to say that their robust democratic states governed by constitutional morality and public legality provided to be successful, while those facing a crisis of democracy with the rise of messianic populism. And recently there was a beautiful article by Patrick Heller on messianic populism. and authoritarian strong men proved to be unprepared and incompetent in this most important duty of any government. This is what the number one I would like to say as far as the COVID has exposed things there. Number two, the related factor behind the successful state has been decentralized governance structures acting in partnership with the civil society. The pandemic also exposed underlying inequalities and shortfalls in democracies and the design of political regime. This is what I would like to say that this is actually the international regime, the situations of international order. This is applicable. Therefore, my submission is that democracy and decentralization is the answer if you want to properly connect with the development, the right to development and sustainable development. In the political economic context, it is applicable at different levels. It may be at the micro level, at the macro level, at the international economic order. This is the case. Therefore, democracy and decentralization, I would like to say that that is the answer. Thank you, fine.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jos. Absolutely pertinent issues, very relevant. I would request Dr. Swami to respond to his reflections, queries, or whatever it is. That will be good. And the next one, instead of what is called together, I think it will be better for you to react or to respond to each one's queries or reflections separately. Dr. Swami.
I should.
So shall we take all the suggestions together?
Yes.
And then
Together?
Yes.
You want together? Okay.
It will
okay.
say.
That was fine.
Yes.
Okay. Then may I now invite Dr. Sailendra, Professor Sailendra, to reflect on what she had spoken about. Professor H.S. Sailendra.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Dr. Ray. Thanks, Arjun, for giving me this opportunity to be part of this interesting and highly relevant discussion. Right, because I compliment Dr. Shyami for giving us a good overview of the discourse on right to development. Of course, starting with the whole issue of recognition of right to development as human rights and its progress and its links to the issue of sustainable development and the acuteness right to development has assumed in the light of the COVID challenges, right? Yeah, so therefore such a succinct in a multidisciplinary frame bringing out that is what I would say as the highlights of her presentation. So therefore she needs to be complimented. Right. Of course, in terms of my own views on the issue of right to development and the presentation Dr. Shyami has made, while at the principal level of considering development as a right, right to development, as such there cannot be any arguments, right? So as we all understand, right, as to how important in general rights are for human beings, and of course also the issue of development as a human right, right? So at the level of principle, right, at the level of theory also, so therefore that linkage of rights and development has been well argued out and well appreciated, and I agree. Of course, I have been studying some of the right-based interventions that government of India has brought out in the recent past. Of course, we have had a number of right-based initiatives in the last maybe I don't know now, I've lost count of the numbers. So many right-based legislations, right-based schemes in the last 2 decades or so, right? At least couple of them, I have myself has studied them, right? Particularly like the MG Narega, the right to employment guarantee scheme, 100-day scheme, and also the right to education. So I have tried to look at both of them from the rights perspective, right? So therefore, my understanding, right? So of course, given the in principle the appreciation for right to development, but at the level of enforceability, right, at the level of enforceability, this right to development has confronted several challenges and has also therefore losing some of its sheen, right? So that is my assessment. So let me briefly, of course I know time is a constraint, but let me briefly highlight a couple of points, and then I'll conclude, because I know the time limit Dr. Arjun has given us. Right, of course, we know overall commitment for right to development, right? The beginning itself has been a kind of ambivalent stand, right? It took more than 30-40 years for the developed countries to commit themselves for this economic right, right? And some of the countries, I guess, have not even approved that, I guess, right? Even US has not possibly is a party to this right to development declaration, right? So that at the global level itself, we know what kind of commitments are there. Donors and several of the players, the issue of international solidarity, which you mentioned, which Dr. Ray also was trying to highlight, the international framework or the politics, right? So that is also not helping, right? The ambivalent stance of various players and various institutions towards this right to development, right, is not helping the matter at the global level and taking it to the logical end. And what else? What else? So if we therefore carefully look at this period, right to development also has come at the period when neoliberalism also has grown. So both have in some sense parallelly grown, and in fact working at cross purpose, right? The neoliberalism and right to development, in principle, possibly they cannot converge. That is my view. Theoretically, they cannot converge, and in reality, that is what has happened. Just one example, right? So we enacted right to education in 2000 as a constitutional right in 2002. Right after, of course, 50 years, we realized that even primary education, elementary education requires right for the children, but we enacted that in 2002. And you know, the rules for implementing this right was done in 2009. So for 7 good years, our policymakers just implemented that and put it in our constitution. For 7 good years, they were just not bothered. They were worried who will meet the bill of this right to education. Will the parents meet the bill? Will the government meet the bill? Will the schools meet the bill? They were debating it for 7 years. So we can imagine, so what is the kind of commitments so our governments have for this right to education. So therefore, my understanding of MG Narega is also same. So I don't want to go into the, I have already done that in some paper and some presentation. I will not go into it. So therefore, whatever my assessment of some of the Indian government-based right to development schemes, so in my view, they only on paper satisfy this scheme or as a policy of right to development, but in reality, not so, right? So therefore, governments are using this as a facade, right? And they don't have any compulsions in reality to implement them. You go into all the programs of them, so they don't have any compulsions. It's only a facade, right? That is how I call, right? Of course, we know what has happened to even our fundamental rights, right? So how fundamental rights are being implemented, right? So we have, of course, included many of them as fundamental rights, even right to education, etc., as fundamental, right? So we know what kind of commitments, and in the light of neoliberalism, so given expenditure deflation and many other kinds of compulsions, so it's just a facade, because the discourse is there globally, locally, so they have to be showing that they are with this right to development, but not by their heart, right? And several examples. Therefore, what we need. So therefore, we need, in principle, it is well and good, well understood, but we need a new theory, a new framework to carry this forward to the logical end, right? So why these kinds of hurdles? on this right to development, right? So that therefore theory to enforceability, theory to accountability, new framework for accountability, right? Otherwise, in my view, it will only remain on paper, and it's not going to make much of a difference even for the sustainable development goals, because they're all implemented under the current framework globally or nationally. They are not using any new framework in terms of justice, accountability, enforceability. They're all only on papers. So therefore, we need new theory for enforceability, of which has been recognized. There is no gainsaying in saying that we need a right. That is already there. So we need a new theory and new framework to make that a reality. So therefore, all players, I agree that it requires a multi-dimensional challenge. All players at level, so therefore has to realize as to how best they can do. Pill to an extent can go, because it's only a spontaneous kinds of intervention. Pill is a spontaneous kinds of intervention, not a broad-based, right? Not a broad-based, committed, radical kind of intervention. As and when someone applies, it can be taken up. So therefore, of course it has worked wonderfully. Pill has worked wonderfully. I know there are a very good number of cases, instances, but not a broad-based one, which can be really making a much broader transformational change. Yeah, those are my remarks. Thanks for giving this opportunity. Thanks, Dr. Shyami, and I congratulate you. Thanks, Dr. Arjun. So I close here.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Shailendra, a very interesting number of issues that you have raised, and Dr. Swami should be able to respond later on to at least some of the most important issues that Professor Shailendra has flagged up. Now, may I request Dr. Gopal to reflect on what he has spoken about. Dr. Swami has spoken, Gopal Krishna, Dr. Gopal Krishna. Dr. Gopal Krishna? No. Dr. Arjun, Gopal is not here.
Sir is here, but not responding. Can you hear us, Dr. Gopal?
Gopal is not here?
No, sir, he is here, but nonetheless, shall we go to Shyami ma'am? If you want to add anything,
to all panelists, speak without video. Okay.
Okay, Dr. Gopal, please.
Gopal is going to speak without video. Okay.
Dr. Gopal?
Gopal is not audible.
Some connection issues is happening.
Yeah.
Sunil sir, why don't you continue, and then we can go to Shyami ma'am. Sunil sir, why don't you go ahead so that then Shyami ma'am can respond also. Sunil sir, can you hear us?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, yes sir. Gopal sir is having some connection issues. So
Okay,
would you
then
like
in that case,
yes, if you want to add anything, then we can go to Dr.
No, I suggest then let Dr. Swami respond to both of these panelists, and in the meanwhile, once Gopal is ready, then later on she can take up Gopal's issues and then respond to his queries and all that. Now, what I suggest that let the speaker respond to both the panelists who have already presented their point of view. Dr. Gopal Krishna, are you ready now? Dr. Gopal? No, I don't think. Dr. Swami, why don't you start? Yeah. I think you better start talking about, Dr. Gopal will be joining maybe later, but you can now start.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you.
better start.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. Thank you, Dr. Chathukulam and Professor Shailendra.
Yeah.
Thank you for those very pertinent questions, observations, some of them more skeptical than others. And I share some of that skepticism, unfortunately. That's what I said in my abstract as well as in the presentation, that there is a lot of theory. There is a lot of, there are very good theories. There are very good principles. But how do we put these into practice? I think that is really the big question. And I would be very interested to know if you all have suggestions. Also, Dr. Shailendra was quite skeptical about the right to development and suggested that we need a new model. And I completely agree with it. We need an alternative paradigm of development. We need a new model, a new theorizing. But I would be also very interested to hear what would be that, because we have, like you said, the human rights-based approach. I think the human rights-based approach is much better known among the governments of the world than the right to development. And some of them, like you mentioned some examples, like with the right to education, they've also tried using it in practice. Whereas the right to development is somewhat more complicated in that it has all these different dimensions, the global dimensions and the national dimensions as well. So it's not just about human rights and development, it's also about peace and security issues. It's bringing a lot of things together. I still feel that there is a lot in there. Of course, it's not complete. Of course, neither sustainable development nor right to development have all that we need, and we definitely need much more. But I still feel that there is a lot in there. For example, now tying it up with what Dr. Chathukulam said about decentralization, democracy, and the whole Gandhian concept, the whole Mahatma Gandhi's ideas of, this world we have everything to fulfill people's needs, but not for their greed. And this whole globalization, this whole way in which the consumer societies that have been pushed by the global institutions, the transnational corporations, the multinational corporations around the world, as well as our own governments. So I think that the elites, whether they're at the international level or at the national level or whatever, have that similar approach. And we have to transform that together. I mean, certainly these are not going to give all the answers, but they do have some very good principles and precepts, but we need something more, I agree. But there is a lot in there that we can take towards changing our whole approach to government. Like I agree completely with Dr. Chathukulam, I think, who's from Kerala, I think. And Kerala, we know the world over, has a very, very, it's sort of outstanding in terms of their governance, as well as the protection of human rights, the protection of, health, the standards of health and education and so on. So a development system that is geared towards human well-being, and again, I come back to the right to development because all that is in there, that the aim of development, the purpose of development should be the constant improvement of human well-being. So there is a lot that we can take from it. And I think some of these local level governments as well have taken this importance of decentralization, of democracy. We know that civic space is shrinking the world over, in some countries more than in others. And I don't have the answers. We have a lot of questions, like we said. How do we make sure that civic space is really, that we have a much more vibrant and living civic space for people to actively, meaningfully participate in local development. And their decentralization is very important, because at the more local level, at the most local, I think you have maybe, I don't know if you still have the panchayat system, or we have in Sri Lanka the Pradeshia Sabhas. The most local level is the best. And then can we also think of, more older societies where the village chiefs and the elders, the community leaders, in our part of the world, religion still plays an important role. So the faith-based leaders, can we think of, I'm interested in thinking with you, because I know that the answers, this more questions than answers. And I would be interested in hearing from the audience as well, the others in the discussion. What could be some of the ways? Could we even think of working together to look into some of these ways of improving? And now the question of the global order. Dr. Sunil Ray, Professor Sunil Ray, you mentioned the all-important global order, and that I didn't really refer to it. I didn't explicitly, but I think the right to development is all about the global order. So I'm sorry if I didn't make that explicit, but the right to development was really a reaction to the global order at the time. But like Professor Shailendra said, that global order is still there. It hasn't changed. If at all, it has become worse. So the right to development began historically as part of the reason was to fight the existing global order. But with globalization, with an active push of globalization, economic globalization, it became only more difficult. I mean, if you look at some global issues now, for example, illicit financial flows out of Africa, particularly, more money is leaving the continent than coming in. So much more is going out as illicit financial flows through company malpractices, such as transfer pricing, trade in misinvoicing, various activities like that. More money is flowing out. So there, I think I am reminded of Article 28 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says everyone is entitled to a social and international order in which all human rights and fundamental freedoms can be realized for all people. Again, like I said at the beginning, it can sound a little like an idealistic, but how do we, what practices, what mechanisms do we put together to reach these ideas? Now, there was the FACTI report recently on illicit financial flows. There are attempts, even at the global level, there are many attempts to have more stronger cooperation and more enforcement. I think, like was already pointed out, one of the most difficult things is enforcement. And that enforcement and accountability, justice, absolutely. But I think human rights are a vehicle. They're a means, they're a pathway towards that justice. What kind of justice? Justice at all levels, global justice, social justice, racial justice. We saw in the middle of this COVID crisis, we saw the killing of George Floyd and the world uprising and international solidarity that came out to fight against this racial injustice. I'm sorry. So I think mobilizing of people, education, capacity building of civil society, because like we know, as already pointed out, governments might be fighting for the right to development, but they may not necessarily carry out, their own. But do people know? Do many people know about human rights? Do many people know about the right to development? Very few. So I think with education also and capacity building, raising awareness, we might at least get to a better state than what we are now. South-South cooperation, when it comes to the gaps in the global order or the injustices of the global order, I really think that South-South cooperation has an important answer to that, because we saw it in COVID, we saw it in an absolute crisis, that North-South cooperation was not taking place that well, traditional cooperation. And South-South cooperation, Cuba was sending out doctors all over the world. India was helping with vaccines and personal protective equipment. Brazil and South Africa and other countries, like the emerging markets, were also helping the way they could. So I think going forward, South-South cooperation could be one, at least at the global level, and when it comes to the global order, to take forward that solidarity cooperation and the regional cooperation as well. You see some regions are coming together a lot more, I think, than our region. Like for Africa, for instance, you have now the Continental Free Trade Agreement. So we also have things like that. But I think that South Asia is rich in many other ways than money. And we share some common, cultural traditions and many things in common, and perhaps also groups of education and intellectuals and more exchange among the South Asian universities. I know that there is a South Asian university itself in New Delhi, but actually one of the things I'm currently involved in, again outside the office, is writing a book together with 3 other scholars, all from South Asia, from different countries, one from India, one from Bangladesh, and another one also from Sri Lanka. And we're trying to put together a book on environmental law and sustainable development, looking at all the different aspects like natural resources, energy, all these different parts. Also with a view to encouraging more conversation and exchange and the sharing of best practices among our countries. I think there is a lot of potential in our region as well. Let me stop there.
Dr. Swami. Very nice. Well, can continue, but may I request Dr. Gopal if he is ready? Dr. Gopal Krishna, if you are ready, will you be able to speak for a while?
Are you able to hear us, Gopal sir?
Dr. Gopal Krishna.
We are not able to hear you.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, yes.
Yes, Professor A.
Yeah. Gopal,
Hello?
are you able to speak now? Gopal? No. No, I think Dr. Arjun, I think
Some connection related issues happening. I think again dropped off. No problem.
I think he's not able to really,
Yes.
So
yes. Why don't you? Yes, you please put forth your points. Yes.
Shall I give my concluding remarks now?
Yes, please, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry that Dr. Gopal Krishna, he is a very eminent researcher. I wish that he could have been here because he's at the same time as a fine lawyer. He has a very great concern for the laws and all. But there unfortunately could not make it possible. Maybe in some other occasion he will be there with us and will be able to make a contribution solidly.
Hello, Professor Ray, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello?
We can hear you. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I will make some brief comments. One is
Okay.
that in the this presentation, and the comments were largely comparative literature survey around law and case laws.
Yes, we can hear you.
Go ahead, Gopal.
In the face of globalization of disease and assault on constitutionalism, one is compelled to observe that law does not have the solution for the crisis which planet faces and the humanity faces. Given the fact that law is a second order subject, it can only promote a status quo, and it has done so far. And in this context, I think more than Gandhi, I think Karl Polanyi's work, The Great Transformation, is more relevant, because one knows that from our experience, and even the speaker had mentioned in passing the reference to the 1984 disaster in Bhopal, which remains, the cases regarding it are still going on.
Yeah. Now, you can got disconnected. Hello, Dr. Gopal. No, it is difficult now.
So in the face of the constitutionalism and the globalization of disease, all the assumptions with regard to welfare state is melting away. And in that context, law related to right to development actually does not alter the status quo. And it is proving Karl Polanyi is right, who said that self-regulating markets cannot be regulated by law. So there is an economic determinism behind lawmaking, and it is creating an alternative reality which is far removed from the real world. Given the fact that there is an insectageddon, where more than 50% of the insect species have either disappeared or are in the process of becoming extinct, because of which there is likely to be a massive adverse impact on agricultural production. Law does not have a solution for the disappearance of plant species and animal species. It does not have any relief for the adverse cognitive consequences of built environment. So I think the approach which law and the right to development approach has adopted is an unethical approach. And this unethical approach is inherent in the corpocentric, anthropocentric right to development. It has endangered all the living beings on planet Earth, contrary to pious observations or acknowledgement to Mother Earth in the Paris Agreement. Sustainable development is undermined by utilitarian concept of balance and naturalization of anti-nature laws. Right to development law, related law is contaminated by predominance of positivist approach. Reciprocal and altruism, which Professor Ray mentions in his paper, is alien to capitalist development and is alien to the kind of lawmaking with.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you through, Gopal? Gopal? Gopal, are you through now?
I think the way development word has been accepted as a fait accompli is also problematic. I don't think development as a process can be made an equivalent of an outcome. And the way law as a discipline has done so is really problematic. It shows that the law as a discipline is philosophically challenged. There is the people have been made agency-less, and laws do not, has rightly been acknowledged that the natural law for human beings to evolve is not being acknowledged. And the issue of as a process needs to be looked at, whether or not it brings in relief for nature.
Yes. Any other point, Gopal? Dr. Gopal?
Sir, his connection is.
I think, yeah. Now, Dr. Swami, you just reflect, just respond to his queries, his points. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
The parochialism which
Go ahead, Dr. Swami.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ray and Dr. Gopal Krishna, for those last comments. As we saw also with previous comments, there is a fair amount of skepticism, and not everyone maybe has as much faith as I do in legal tools. But I think that economics also has not really brought us to where we should, I mean, the traditional. I think in economics, again, there are so many different theories and so many different paradigms, and I'm not an economist, so I will not go into that. But the mainstream development, the kind of development that has been done and that has been pushed over the last few decades by international economic institutions, as well as the business, international business, is also not has also not led us to a way in which we can protect and preserve human life, human health, human well-being. Plus, very importantly, like the speakers mentioned, nature, the preservation and protection of nature. So I think all of our disciplines, whether it be economics or law, or take another discipline, so many others, social sciences, all have the negatives and the positives. And I think what we could be doing is working together more, taking the best of each and putting together. I think while the law certainly doesn't have all the answers, it could have some. It helps to do some regulation, which is badly needed, some management. So globalization is not necessarily a bad thing, but it has not been managed properly. It has not been regulated properly. And so we end up in the kind of situations that we have. I come from a country, for instance, where we have all these, like we do a lot of supply of clothes, of garments, of textiles, and we see, at that level, the factory level, the different problems. Then we saw the Rana Plaza case in Bangladesh, where an entire building collapsed because of so there's a race to the bottom. The companies, the global companies, go to places, poor places, where environmental and human rights and labor standards are lowest. It's a race to the bottom. So in that sense also, coming from a more negative approach, I think there is something to be said for the law. There is something to be said for policy, because there is some way to try and minimize the damage and maximize the good. Now, another thing about the right to development is the process angle. Like I said, it's not the best, certainly, but it is a sort of an alternative idea of development, in that it is saying what is the end result of development. It is not just GDP, per capita income, not the usual economic aggregates only, but human well-being. And it came before the environmental consciousness, and therefore it does not mention the well-being of the planet or nature, which we find in all the later documents and instruments on sustainable development. Now, again, I think the problem, like has been pointed out before also, is not so much about the tools themselves, but their non-enforcement, their non-implementation. And that is again due to many factors at all levels, local, national, international level, that these things are not properly. So maybe what we need to do to better the situation, at least from the legal angle, which is the only angle that I really know and I can talk from, is to improve on these standards and laws, and to improve the implementation and the enforcement of these. Now, again, international cooperation, we know the rules like, or the commitments to give 0.7% of in ODA for richer countries to do that. We know that very few countries, we can count on our hands, less than 5 countries do that. Right. On the other hand, there is large-scale illicit financial flows out of the South. But what can be done? The right to development was perhaps a weak attempt to try and bring about more fairness, more justice, more equity at the international level, which one can say has not necessarily worked up to now. But I have to tell you another important development. Up to date, and as rightly pointed out by some of the discussants, the right to development itself is a bit controversial still, because it's always, the proponents of this right have always been developing countries. But some of those developing countries are also not so strongly supporting it now, as developing countries gradually emerge and become developed countries. The developed countries, on the other hand, have always soft-pedaled on the right to development at important junctures, such as 1993 World Conference of Human Rights, the Vienna Program and Declaration of Human Rights. All countries of the United Nations agreed that the right to development is a human right like all other rights. But since then, and again, it's the implementation problem. So they agree in principle. But when it comes to implementation, and so logically, if the right to development is a human right, then, for example, just to give one example, then that 0.7 becomes not just a matter of choice, but almost a matter of obligation, right? I say almost because, again, we can go into the aspect of whether the right to development, because it's a declaration and not a convention, how legally binding is it, and we can go on and on. However, I should tell you there's an important development going on right now, that there is a movement towards a legally binding convention, a legally binding instrument on the right to development. I can share some links with Arjun later, and if anyone is interested, we could share with others. There is a draft text, and countries have actually started negotiating on this draft text to make it legally binding. And that way we can get more enforcement, more implementation. The developed countries who have always not been great supporters of the right to development are not really showing support for this. But if at least among the rest, there is some kind of consensus, and we don't know, the developed countries might also join, we don't know at this point, but all I can say is that negotiations have started towards something more binding on the right to development. Like my final point is that I also don't see these as the final answers to anything, either the right to development or sustainable development. But I think that tools like public interest litigation, and again, I think I should say that the reason why we had public interest litigation cases was exactly because the law was not being enforced. So people who were interested, like MC Mehta and others in other countries, brought these cases. The ideal is not that. The ideal is not for damage to happen, for people to be killed or deprived of their homes or displaced, environment to be damaged, and then to bring a case which takes forever and which takes a lot of money, etc. The ideal is that all this, the goodness of the environment, the goodness of human beings, the well-being of all these people go into the policy, that they go, and that's the whole point of the right to development, that it's part and parcel of the economic policy. And the economic planning, that it goes into the planning, the policy, the organization, that all of this is moved towards well-being and the well-being of everybody, not just the better off people, but especially the poorer people, the disabled people, the women, the children, everybody. So ideally, it should be part of policy making, and that policy should be put into practice. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shyami. Perhaps if the time would have permitted you to speak more, you could have spoken. I could have enlightened more by what you're speaking about. However, let us agree to disagree with you on certain points. Yeah, Dr. Shyami, I feel to give my concluding remarks as simply as I can. Yeah, your concerns are at the right place. But when it comes to analyzing the situation, the components that you have taken into consideration, to my mind, and after hearing the eminent panelist, there is a shortfall of understanding. Now, when you say that, I have many questions but do not have an answer. Just now, a minute ago, you were telling. I think that is something which is not expected anymore from any of us. We cease to be social scientists. We are not scientists then. If we cannot have somewhat definite, not definite, nothing what is called absolute, but certainly a conclusive statement that can, certain extent, give some answer to the questions. And that is what exactly is required today. And to do that, I strongly feel that certain analytical components that need to be added to one that you have already explained, which is extremely interesting and convincing to me. But what are those things? Now, today, if you go back to Sri Lanka, I've studied a bit inner dynamics of rural economy and all that. I've been studying Indian economy, so on and so forth, many other Latin American countries and all that. Now, what comes to the fore is very important for us to recognize. It's a conflict between, ever since, as you said very rightly, the development paradigm, which is rooted in the Western countries, which is basically promoting the interest of the capital system. Let us recognize this fact. Let us say, we never want to recognize, we never want to say, we never want to talk about it. The difficulties with the capital system, the limitations of the capital system, we never recognize, we never went in your speech, nowhere did you figure. But if you really look back analytically to see where the problem is rooted, it is this system. We do not want to talk explicit recognition about this one. And which is why you find this powerless and powerful. A kind of antagonism that has been continuously going on. Powerless people are trying to carve out some space for their life, for dignified life. Let it be Latin American countries, let it be some parts of Sri Lanka, let it be some parts of India. As you said, marginalized. It's a story everywhere. Now, why does it happen? This conflict is something need to be recognized. And why this conflict? Just because a large number of people, you are 99%, you are which side you are. Remember, just a few years ago, when this Wall Street Gherav was there is a big slogan in America, which side you are. Now, something which goes everywhere now, which side you are. Now, it is this side, people, largest majority, craving God, space to have a dignified life, not running around for livelihood when they are being thrown out by the migrant as migrant workers, not running out for oxygen for survival, not running out of what is called running for what is called medicines everywhere and become the victim of the bulk markets of thousands of times, not becoming victim of the mice of money lenders, money people, and so on and so forth. In other words, you find this powerless and powerful something which is a part of life. You need to recognize it. Similarly, talk about you said very rightly, Mahatma Gandhi is quoted. Jos also talked about this one. That nothing is for greed, all for human beings. Then everybody knows about it. What is your statement on that? What is that you want to do? Dr. Jos told you have to do distribution of the resources. Let us make an explicit recognition to the fact that if you do not distribute the resources to the people, then therefore inequality will continue. And so long as the inequality continues, this what is called sustainable development is something which is impossible to talk about. For the last 20 years, I have been talking about sustainable development. How many international forums I joined in the World Bank, UNDP, and so on and so forth. And everybody talks about sustainable development. There are big theses, 200 pages, 20 pages, 50 pages, and all kinds of stories. Nothing happened. Why? It is because the fact that the actual problem, the reason why the sustainable development is not being taken place, that is not being addressed at all. Not at all addressed. Now it is again the question of the resource distribution. You talk about distribution of the resources. You talk about the right to development. Have you ever specified right to development? Whose development? Is the minority development? Or the majority? Let us put it very straight. It is the deprived, marginalized. It is their right for development. It is this something which need to be categorical assessment. And unless you do it, I think we are not going to do justice anymore to that one. And therefore, you need to talk about systemic change. You need to talk about systemic change that even Jos and Dr. Shailendra did hint at. And of course, the other panelists, our Gopal Krishna, did speak about this one. I mean, this kind of rhetoric that goes on and on, we survive on that, go on pulling on that, developing arguments over arguments without touching the real issues. Whether the government is indifferent or not, we do not want to talk about it. Even if we talk about it, something becomes a redundant point, and so on and so forth. So in other words, what is the systemic change, both at the micro level and macro level? If you do not do it, for example, you talk about international law. Look at what is the Paris Agreement now on it. Forget about Paris, the latest taking place. Copenhagen. Do you remember the history of the Copenhagen Agreement? What happened? You talked about solidarity of the people, third world countries. It is what is called Cuban president. That time he was surviving. I still remember, it's a big paper, a number of papers in economic and political came out. And a friend of mine who attended that particular program, he also came and told me. There is a huge what is called support of, Fidel Castro's. He drafted a letter on the second or third day to all the third world countries together, including Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Then Obama came on the fourth or fifth day, I forget the whole episode. And then once Obama came, because internally they are all aligned. Once Obama came, the entire thing was thrown out. All efforts went to the drain. And Obama dismantled the entire program. So what happened to the Copenhagen program? What happened to the earlier, what is called environmental, the Kyoto Protocol? Just remember Kyoto Protocol, how nicely it was designed based on the international rules and regulations. But what happened to that? It is the global order. You need to accept the fact that it is the global order, the superior power relationship. It is this dismantle each and every effort that you make. It is precisely that you need to talk about it. I think people have been speaking about it. So when Dr. Swami spoke, I would expect that these concerns, when the concerns are on the right side, these are the components which need to be really whipped into in hard discussion, and therefore it becomes much more further enriched. And lastly, what you said is very, very interesting, and I do emphasize on that, that coming together third world countries like South Asian, forget about entire third world, South Asian countries. Now, South Asian countries have, I remember to have read the third volume of Garner Medial, Nobel laureate, long ago. And the third volume, the last few pages, he devoted on what Asian, South Asian countries' culture. That is a commonness of all. I think there is something which is very important for us to talk about, to bind together all of us, to address the problem which every one of us in certain proportion facing together at the same time. It is this, from your speech perhaps, I would request Dr. Arjun, the IMPRI should open a forum to see that South Asian countries, under your leadership, some of your leadership, coming together, have discussions amongst ourselves and generate a different kind of level of developmental discourse. It is not what is called, the issue is that the basic fundamental objective would be to bring us together, thrash out the issues, and come together, much more what is called open discussion about this thing. It is a kind of a solidarity, intellectual solidarity, academic solidarity of the people together to see that a problem from single point of view, maybe that will strengthen the entire process of change and transformation that we have been looking forward to see that happens in the third world countries. If that happens, we have this opportunity. Dr. Arjun, may I appeal Dr. Arjun from institute side, he can take the initiative to see that Dr. Swami will be able to really generate a different kind of momentum all together to see that we are up together in South Asian countries together to see to strike what is called international solidarity, at least at this regional level that she talked about, where it is possible for us to address some of the problems or some of the component of analysis which are missing in this whole analysis, and we'll be able to have again much more clarity about the development process than what we are having now. Thank you so much. I thank all of you. I thank Swami to have a very, very provocative, very, very exciting, presentation. I think we should keep it up, and also thank from my side some of the panelists, this eminent panelists for their contribution, brief intervention, but very, very important, I must say. With all these words, I will hand over to Dr. Arjun for further formalities. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, Professor Ray, and all our participants for also being with us despite so many technical glitches. So to give a formal vote of thanks, I invite Anshula Mehta, who is Senior Assistant Director, to formally thank all the participants. Anshula, over to you.
Thank you. So on behalf of the IMPRI Center for Human Dignity and Development, I'd like to formally thank all of you for joining us for this web policy talk. We are grateful to our speaker, Dr. Shyami Puvimanasinghe, for taking out the time to be with us and delivering this very insightful talk on the right to development and sustainable development, reflections on global and South region development. Thank you, ma'am. We are grateful to Professor Sunil Ray for chairing and moderating the session and adding his insights to the deliberation. Thank you, sir. And we are grateful to our discussants, Professor H.S. Shailendra, Dr. Jos Chathukulam, and Dr. Gopal Krishna for being with us today and for sharing their comments and perspectives. Thank you to all of us who joined us here on Zoom or on Facebook Live, or whoever is watching later on YouTube or listening on our podcast. We hope that you all continue to tune in to our future episodes of Holistic Development. Thank you, and I hope you have a good day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you to all of you, and have a nice day. Nice evening. Please take care of it.
Arjun, last 2 words from your side, Arjun.
Sir, I really look forward to all this deliberation, and as an economics student, law really excites us to really know what are the levers which we can use. But obviously there is so much of not dualism, but so much of multiple of issues we need to learn from thank you, everyone. We were really enlightened to get into this discourse.
Why not South Asian Forum that I'm talking about?
And we have a series called The State of Economic Development in South Asia.
Oh, well, that's fantastic.
Many experts from South Asia have also, there we have also tried to take up issues of environment, coast, and many things. But we look forward to learning more on this theory and application discourse. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shyami, Professor Shailendra, Gopal sir, and Dr. Jos. Thank you.